Ladies and gentlemen, gather round for a spine-tingling exploration into the inner workings of one of Spider-Man's most notorious foes, the Green Goblin. Have you ever wondered what makes this cackling, pumpkin bomb-hurling villain tick? Well, prepare to have your curiosity satisfied as we delve deep into the anatomy of the Green Goblin himself. We will be taking a closer look at his bone structure, his musculature, and even his brain, all in the name of uncovering the secrets behind this diabolical mastermind. And trust me, there is more to this guy than just a funky Halloween costume and a glider. So strap in, folks, because things are about to get spooky. Whether you are a die-hard comic book fan or just a casual admirer of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, this is one video you would not want to miss. Let us uncover the sinister science behind the Green Goblin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How does he get his power? The Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's most infamous foes. But how on earth did he get his powers? Well, my dear friend, let me tell you the tale. It all started with Norman Osborn, a man with a penchant for villainy and a desire for power. After framing his colleague for embezzlement, Norman stumbled upon some notes that promised to turn a mere mortal into a superhuman being. And of course, being the power-hungry man he was, Norman just had to give it a try. His first attempt turned his assistant into a red creature with a serious temper problem, which is not exactly what Norman had in mind. But did he give up? Of course not. He tried again, only to have his son Harry mess with the formula out of spite. The result? An explosion in Norman's face that left him hospitalized for a week. But here is the twist. The explosion actually worked in Norman's favor. He emerged from the hospital with enhanced mental and physical functions, which make him a fearsome opponent for any superhero. Unfortunately, the exposure also drove him insane, which led him to don a ridiculous green suit and terrorize the city as the Green Goblin. So there you have it, folks. Green Goblin got his powers through a series of mishaps and a serious case of insanity. It just goes to show that sometimes the road to becoming a supervillain is paved with explosive accidents and family drama. Does he have healing ability? The Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, has more than just his superhuman strength and intelligence going for him, thanks to the Oz formula that gave him his powers. He also possesses a remarkable healing ability. While not on the same level as Wolverine's infamous healing factor, the Green Goblin's metabolism is like a turbocharged engine that not only fuels his superhuman powers, but also gives him a remarkable healing ability. This increased metabolism allows him to regenerate damaged tissue at a rapid rate, far beyond what a regular human body is capable of. In fact, his regenerative powers are so potent that he's been able to recover from injuries that would have been fatal to anyone else. For example, he once impaled himself with his own glider and survived, thanks to his speedy healing. And when he was webbed to his own chest during a series of explosions, he miraculously survived, thanks to his regenerative abilities. It is clear that the Green Goblin's healing factor is a significant advantage in battle. When combined with his super strength and intelligence, it makes him a great foe for Spider-Man to face. With his ability to quickly heal from injuries, the Green Goblin can take a lot of punishment and keep coming back for more. It is no wonder he is one of Spider-Man's most feared adversaries. What disease does Norman Osborn have? Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin himself. When it comes to supervillains, he is definitely not one to be trifled with. But did you know that he is not just evil, he is also sick? Yes, that is right. He is not just your average crazy person. Oh no, he has got a fancy-sounding psychological disorder called Norman Syndrome that makes him feel like the king of the world, while also convinced that everyone is out to get him. It's like a recipe for a mental health disaster, with a dash of megalomania, a sprinkle of paranoia, and a few other psychiatric ingredients thrown in for some good measure. Now, if you're wondering what megalomania is, it is basically the fancy way of saying that Norman thinks he is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And not just regular sliced bread, mind you, but artisanal, organic, gluten-free sliced bread that has been sprinkled with fairy dust. Needless to say, this kind of thinking can be pretty dangerous, especially when combined with paranoia, which is the unfounded suspicion that everyone is out to get you. Norman Osborn has got it all. a psychological disorder that is affecting his physical health too. It is like a 2-for-1 deal of chaos and confusion. His body is shaking like a Polaroid picture. His behavior is as unpredictable as a toddler on a sugar high, and his mood swings are so intense they could put a roller coaster to shame, all thanks to that Norman syndrome of his. Put all of that together, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Norman becomes very aggressive and loses his rationality, which is never a good thing, especially when you are a supervillain with access to all sorts of dangerous gadgets and weapons. But fear not, dear fans, for there is hope. While there is no apparent cure for Norman syndrome, Norman's illnesses are usually maintained through the use of strong medications and good old therapy. Yes, even supervillains need therapy sometimes. Who knew? And it is not the only disease that Norman Osborn is affected with. Retroviral hyperplasia is a disease without a known cure that is known to be passed down through the Osborn family. It was passed from Norman to Harry, which just goes to show that when it comes to genetics, sometimes you really do get the short end of the stick. But despite all of this, Norman has managed to come to terms with his illness and has even learned to manage his symptoms. With the help of his allies, he's been able to keep his megalomania and paranoia in check, mostly, and he has even found ways to cope with the physical symptoms of his illness. So there you have it, folks. Norman Osborn may be a supervillain, but he is also a person with a complex medical condition, and while we may not condone his actions, we can at least sympathize with the fact that he is dealing with a lot more than just the usual supervillain stuff. Who knows? Maybe one day he will even be able to get the help he needs to overcome his illness and leave his life of crime behind. But until then, we will just have to keep an eye out for the Green Goblin and hope that Spider-Man is up to the challenge. Does Green Goblin have dissociative identity disorder? The Green Goblin may be a man with a split personality in some adaptations, but in the comics, he's just a man with a whole lot of issues. And really, isn't that what we all love about comic book villains? They're just so delightfully messed up. The Green Goblin is a product of Norman Osborn's twisted psyche. Despite the misconceptions brought about by certain adaptations, the comic book canon remains true to the original interpretation of the character. When it comes to the Green Goblin, he's just a regular old supervillain with a severe case of megalomania and a penchant for pumpkin bombs. And let us be honest, if he did have dissociative identity disorder, it would probably just make him even more dangerous. Can you imagine trying to negotiate with a guy who could switch between a billionaire businessman and a psychotic goblin at the drop of a hat? No thanks, I will pass. Just imagine the Green Goblin having to deal with his alter ego Norman, who is constantly trying to convince him to do the right thing. It would be like a superhero version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but with more pumpkin bombs and glider action. But alas, it is just not the case. The Green Goblin is simply a persona that Norman adopts, and not a separate personality. And let's be real, with all the chaos and destruction he causes, we can't really blame poor Norman for wanting to distance himself from the Green Goblin. It's like having a crazy ex who just won't leave you alone. Except in this case, the ex is a super-powered supervillain who wants to take over the world. So it turns out the Green Goblin does not have dissociative identity disorder after all. But well, with all those masks and cackling laughter, who can blame us for thinking he might have a few screws loose? And who knows, maybe Norman just needs a good therapist to help him sort out his issues. Although, let's be honest, it's probably easier to just let Spider-Man handle him. After all, superheroes are basically just highly trained therapists in spandex, right? Why does Norman go crazy? Well, it seems like Norman's mental breakdown was a perfect storm of suppressed trauma, psychological issues, and a strained relationship with his father. His suppressed trauma from the death of his mother was undoubtedly a major contributor, as it left a deep emotional scar on him that he was never able to fully process. This trauma likely simmered beneath the surface for years, festering and growing until it eventually erupted into a full-blown mental breakdown. To make matters worse, Norman's strained relationship with his father likely only added fuel to the fire. His father was distant and unsupportive, which left Norman feeling isolated and alone in the world. This lack of emotional support likely exacerbated his pre-existing psychological issues and made it even more difficult for him to cope with his trauma. As Norman's mental state continued to deteriorate, he began to lose touch with reality. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and he struggled to distinguish between what was real and what was not. This loss of control eventually led to his descent into madness, as he became more and more disconnected from the world around him. In addition to his traumatic past, Norman also struggled with a host of psychological issues. He really hit the jackpot when it comes to reasons to go crazy. It's no wonder his behavior became increasingly erratic and unstable. I mean, who wouldn't be a little unhinged after all that? It is almost impressive that he held it together for as long as he did, but in the end, his grip on reality slips away, and he becomes a prime example of what can happen when you do not properly process your emotions. So, let this be a lesson to all of us. If you are feeling a little crazy, take a deep breath and talk to someone, or else you might end up like Norman, and nobody wants that. Can he reproduce? Norman Osborn's relationship with his wife Emily. It is a love story for the ages. If by ages you mean a tale of devotion, deception, and kidnapping, Norman was smitten with Emily, the only person he ever showed love to, but she saw through his monstrous ways and faked her own death to escape him. Talk about the ultimate form of ghosting. Decades later, Emily resurfaced as the nanny to her grandchildren, going by the name Emma, and taking blood samples from them for unknown reasons. Hey, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just really into genealogy? But Emily had a dark reason for being around her grandchildren. She knew Norman would come after them, so she kidnapped them to keep them safe. Unfortunately for her, Liz Allen had placed tracking chips on the boys, which led to a chaotic reunion between Emily, Norman, Liz, Harry, and some superheroes. It's like a twisted version of Bring Your Kid to Work Day. In the end, Emily was forgiven by her son Harry and tasked with protecting his child, Stanley. It is a heartwarming family reunion. If by heartwarming you mean potentially explosive and full of superpowered drama. And who knows, maybe one day the Osborn name will mean something good, or at least not involve merging innocent children with symbiotes. And let us get to the burning question on everyone's mind: can the Green Goblin reproduce? Well, the answer is pretty obvious, considering Harry Osborn, his son, takes up the mantle of Green Goblin after his death. Now let us talk a little bit more about the father and son duo. Well, Norman Osborn sure knows how to make a deal, doesn't he? Not content with just being a wealthy industrialist, he decided to dabble in demon negotiations and bargain away his own son's soul. Talk about taking helicopter parenting to a whole new level. And poor Harry is destined to suffer personal tragedies and eternal damnation, all because of his father's greed. I mean, sure, some parents might push their children to succeed, but bargaining with demons? That's a whole new level of tiger parenting. The man managed to create a son, although I'm not sure if that is something to brag about, given the circumstances. And who knows, maybe he has got more offspring out there, ready to be sacrificed for the sake of corporate success. All in all, Norman Osborn may be a successful businessman, but his parenting skills could use some work. And as for his demon deals, well, let's just say he should stick to negotiating with humans from now on. Is Green Goblin crazier than Joker? Comparing the Green Goblin and the Joker is like trying to decide whether to eat an apple or a banana for breakfast. Sure, they are both fruits, but they are completely different. The Green Goblin is like the apple, straightforward, reliable, and sometimes a bit boring. Meanwhile, the Joker is like a banana, twisted, unpredictable, and often leaving you wondering what the heck just happened. Sure, Norman Osborn might be able to switch between his personas, but that does not mean he is any less crazy than the Joker. After all, the Green Goblin killed Peter Parker's first love, Gwen Stacy. That is not exactly the action of a sane individual, but the Joker takes the cake in terms of insanity. He is so crazy that he is actually super sane. He knows he is a comic book character and will do anything to keep the story going. So, is the Green Goblin crazier than the Joker? It's like asking whether an apple is crazier than a banana. Well, like I said, they are just different. But if I had to choose, I would say the Joker is definitely the more unhinged of the two. The Green Goblin may be a bit more restrained in his villainy, but the Joker is willing to do anything and everything to achieve his goals. And that is what makes him truly crazy, in the most entertaining way possible. Maybe I'm the crazy one for comparing two of the most twisted villains in the comic book world to fruits. Who knows? Is he immortal? The infamous question of whether or not the Green Goblin is immortal. That is the question that has plagued comic book fans for decades. Of course, we all know that he died a tragic death at the hands of his arch-nemesis Spider-Man in the 2002 movie. But as it turns out, death is just a minor inconvenience for the Goblin. In the comics, it is revealed that Norman Osborn actually survived his death thanks to the secret Goblin formula that gave him a healing factor. That is right, he's basically a Marvel version of Deadpool, except with more pumpkin bombs and less fourth wall breaking. But that is not all. As it turns out, The key to the Green Goblin's immortality is draining his relatives of their blood. Yes, you heard that right. He is like a vampire, but instead of sucking blood for sustenance, he drains it to keep himself young and energized. Real sick stuff indeed. And if that was not enough, the Green Goblin also goes through a massive transformation that turns him into the Galactic Goblin. I mean, who needs a mere mortal lifespan when you can become a cosmic supervillain? But fear not, true believers, for the Green Goblin's reign of terror is not eternal. In the end, he is defeated by a team of futuristic mutants and thrown in prison. Penniless, friendless, and hopeless, he is forced to confront his future, which is looking pretty bleak. So, is the Green Goblin immortal? Technically, yes, but his immortality comes at a steep price, and in the end, it is not enough to save him from his own twisted fate. What is his weakness? Well, is not the Green Goblin quite the complex character? Let us break it down, shall we? Firstly, we have the post-traumatic stress disorder, which is not exactly a weakness in the traditional sense, but more of a psychological hurdle for our dear Norman. Seeing hallucinations of those he has hurt is certainly not ideal, but it is understandable, given his past. Perhaps a therapist could help him work through his guilt and help him move forward. Next up, we have mental instability, which is a bit more concrete in terms of a weakness. Sure, the Goblin formula made him a genius, but at what cost? His sanity, that's what. And let's be real, excessive arrogance and delusions of grandeur are not exactly qualities you want in a supervillain. Maybe he should have stuck to being a scientist instead of trying to take over the world. And then there is pride. Ah, yes, the downfall of many a villain. Norman's belief that he cannot be defeated is certainly a weakness, especially when it leads him to underestimate his opponents. I mean, come on, letting Spider-Man escape just to prove a point? That is just asking for trouble. Maybe he should have taken a page out of Spidey's book and practiced a little humility. All in all, it is clear that the Green Goblin has a fair share of weaknesses. But hey, nobody's perfect, right? Maybe with a little self-reflection and therapy, Norman can work through his issues and become a better, less evil person. Or, he could just keep trying to take over the world. Whatever floats his glider, I guess. Is Norman Osborn pure evil? So, the Green Goblin, the classic comic book villain who has been terrorizing Spider-Man for decades, is he pure evil? Well, that is a tricky question. It all depends on how you look at it. On the one hand, there is Norman Osborn, the man behind the mask. He is flawed, sure, but he's not entirely bad. He is a genius scientist and a decent man who cares for his son Harry, even if he does not always show it. But then there is the Green Goblin, his alter ego, who is definitely a different story altogether. The Green Goblin is a maniacal criminal who thrives on chaos and violence. He's got a fanatical hatred for Spider-Man and will stop at nothing to take him down. He has access to high-tech gadgets and weapons and is not afraid to use them to terrorize innocent citizens and kill people. So, is he evil? From a purely moral standpoint, it is hard to argue otherwise. The Green Goblin has performed many evil acts, and he has got no respect for human life. He is a dangerous, maniacal criminal who has caused a lot of pain and suffering. But wait, there's more. From a personal perspective, it is not quite so cut and dried. Norman Osborn has suffered personal loss and has had his inventions stolen from him. He has got his own motivations and grievances that drive him to do what he does. And while he is not always the most moral person, it is important to consider his perspective and not just label him as exclusively evil. It is also worth noting that different versions of the Green Goblin have been depicted differently. In some versions, he is utterly irredeemable and psychotic, while in others, he is a more complex character with some redeeming qualities. So, is the Green Goblin pure evil? It is a matter of perspective. From one angle, he is a dangerous criminal who has caused a lot of harm, and from another, he is a flawed man with his own motivations and grievances. It all depends on how you look at it. But let's be real, no matter how you slice it, he is still a pretty darn good villain.
A mistrial! This court is adjourned!
Marvelous verdict. And that, my friends, is the anatomy of the Green Goblin laid bare. From his twisted musculature to his diabolical brain, we have uncovered the secrets that make this villain one of Spider-Man's most terrifying foes. As we have seen, the Green Goblin is more than just a man in a costume. He is a complex and terrifying adversary with a physiology that is every bit as twisted as his mind, and understanding that physiology is key to defeating him. So, whether you are a fan of the comics, the movies, or just a lover of science, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of the Green Goblin. And who knows, with this newfound knowledge, maybe you will be the one to finally bring him to justice once and for all. So, what do you think of the Green Goblin as a classic hero? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for joining us. And if you like this video, do not forget to subscribe and hit that like button on your way out. Until next time, keep your spider sense tingling. Have a good one, folks.
But deliver us.